In sports, being the home team means you're playing the game in the place where your franchise is located, consistently using a designated venue as your home arena, which is located in the place where your home players most likely live, and where the opponents don't. So the opponents will have to travel much further to get to the game. Hence, they are referred to as the away, road, or visiting team. And with playing at home comes what's referred to as home court, field, or ice advantage.
Well, the Minnesota Wild are looking for a home ice advantage. We hear about home ice advantage.
Creating that home ice advantage.
Take advantage of it.
Yeah, take advantage of that.
So, in hockey, what's the advantage of being the home team? Well, in theory, you should be much more comfortable than the visiting team in almost every way. You get to stay at home and have the familiarity of everything that comes with it, rather than staying in a hotel where you aren't as familiar with your surroundings. You don't have to cram yourself into a plane and take a long flight to the game. You and your body will be much more acclimatized to the weather, be it temperatures, humidity, precipitation, or altitude. You'll be much more used to everything about the arena itself, from the staff, to the dressing rooms, to the bench doors, to the ice quality, to how the puck bounces off the boards and glass, right down to how the place smells. And obviously, the majority of fans in attendance will not only be actively cheering for you, but against your opponents.
It's so loud, it's so quaint, it is their home ice.
For many sports, the advantages of being the home team sort of end there, only hockey takes it further.
Is hockey like basketball? You guys have home ice advantage? You like that, home ice advantage?
That's what they call it.
Oh, okay.
Being the home team in hockey actually comes with significant on-ice, in-game advantages that are baked into the rules, and those rules are often enforced more accurately than most rules in the sport. At the start of the game and upon stoppages in play, the home team is allowed to see which players the visiting team puts on the ice, and then choose which players they would like to go out to match up against them if they would like to, as long as it's done in a relatively timely manner.
He's got to get off the ice!
The only time they can't line match is when they're called for icing.
The top line for St. Louis comes on the ice. They go to work. This shows you how tough the icing rule is.
According to many players, being allowed to touch the ice with your stick after your opponent does is advantageous for face-offs, and another home ice advantage rule is that the visiting team also has to put their stick down on the ice before the home team's player for a center ice face-off, increasing the chances the home team gains possession of the puck. For all other face-offs, the player on the defensive side must put their stick down on the ice first. So if it's a face-off in your zone or at your blue line, you have to touch the ice first. But as the home team, you can also choose to put it down first if you'd like to. And of course, the home team is allowed to choose whether or not they would like to shoot first or second in the shootout. But regardless of how advantageous those rules sound, they play very minimal roles compared to some of the basic familiarity stuff. Certainly compared to the effects of fans, for instance, who, believe it or not, may legitimately be the single most important factor in determining how much advantage the home team gets. So let's get into all this and much more. We'll figure out why, with all these rules and effects tilting the game in favor of the home team, home ice advantage isn't what it used to be, why statistical gaps indicating home ice advantage are closing, why visiting teams are continuing to win more and more games, and why we should take many NHL stats with a grain of salt because teams inflate or deflate their players' numbers at home. This video is brought to you by my Patreon. I have no interest in punishing you for watching my videos by advertising the typical trash brands we see all the time. Unfortunately, they're the only ones that seem to be desperate enough to reach out for advertisement. Coincidence when something doesn't sell itself, huh? Anyway, I would greatly appreciate your support over there if you enjoy my channel, as these videos take a very long time and a lot of effort to make, and I'd like to make many more. Now let's talk home ice. When looking at past seasons, there's positive correlation pretty much across the board for variable statistics that indicate home ice advantage, but they also indicate that the gap between positive home and away results is closing. Now the proof behind all this decline. Let's take a look at some statistics going back to the start of the salary cap era, the 2005-2006 season. This graph features points earned by home and away teams since then. As we can see, the amount of home points earned stayed pretty level, but has dipped lower than it was in the 2000s, despite that there's 2 additional teams in the league now that are adding to the tally. And the amount of points earned by visiting teams has consistently been rising, meaning the gap between the two is indeed closing. 5% is often considered the margin for significant relevance, and many stats have closed that gap in percentage. We went from a 9% advantage in 2005-2006 to around a 3% advantage in 2023-2024. So now that we know that significantly better results, at least partially influenced by home ice advantages, are actually declining, and that visiting teams are constantly closing the difference, here's the big question. Why is the decline of home ice advantage happening?
Our team seems to always be better on the road, and that's something we've been trying to figure out how to get better at home, because so many other teams have that advantage at home, which we don't really have.
Of course, some players consistently thrive in adversity and unfamiliarity to the point where they seemingly prefer being the visiting team.
I don't know, it's just, you just feel more loose going in on the road. It's just as fun scoring, I think, in front of your own fans as just silencing a building.
But it's not some drastic league-wide team bonding and rallying away from home thing, because the vast majority of players do not improve on the road, and neither do their their stats. So what's going on here? One of my favorite YouTube channels is that of Michael MacKelvie. He talks primarily about basketball, and he made a video exploring the same topic, but for basketball. The hypothesis was that since refereeing actually accounted for the majority of tangible home court advantage, and that since three-pointers, a shot typically made or missed without debatable contact on the play, are much more prevalent than ever, there's less opportunity for biased decisions from the most influential variables, the refs, which has led to significantly less home court advantage than there used to be. But hockey doesn't follow the same mold as basketball. In hockey, there are very rarely relatively uncontested scoring chances where not a single person had an argument for a penalty call anywhere on the ice leading to the goal. And of course, there is no shot worth additional points on the scoreboard, let alone one that's usually taken when you have no one around you. And the referees are in fact having less and less impact on hockey games too, but for almost the exact opposite reason as basketball. Hockey is constantly getting drastically better and better.
David, beautiful skid move.
The parity in the game today is so good, so it doesn't matter if you're on the road or home.
High-end, well-rounded skills have become necessities, as well as top-level speed, physicality, and effort, which isn't unique to hockey, but as a result, despite what your uncle says, hockey is also far more physical within the rules than ever. There used to be more dirty hits, and players who were slow as molasses compared to today's players used to arbitrarily bump into each other in close quarters more frequently. You know, the real, physical, noble, brave, and tough era of the sport. Unfortunately for your uncle, it's not even close. There are far more credited body checks now than ever from individual teams and league-wide. I feel like, actually watching the sport could tell you that without looking at numbers, but who's to say? This graph features hits tallied by home and away teams over the years. As we can see, those numbers have trended upward, and it only gets more apparent the further you go back. And today's hits are coming from the fastest players ever, who are the best on their edges of all time, wearing the best equipment of all time, which makes giving and taking hits seem like much less of an internal debate. So, with the increase of speed and physicality comes less space and more gray area plays, meaning unlike what the increase of skill is doing for basketball, in hockey, there is more of an opportunity for biased decisions from the most influential variables, the refs. Yet, instead of calling more penalties left, right, and center, referees of today are applying an old playoff excuse to the regular season. They just let the players play, and are calling less penalties than ever as a result. Why is that relevant to home ice advantage? This graph features penalties taken by home and away teams over the years. There are more penalties taken on the road, in part because they're playing with legit face-off and line change disadvantages, which result in less possession, which can obviously result in more penalties based purely on the fact that the home team should have possession of the puck more. But I'm afraid it's not that simple, as even teams with consistently terrible home records and terrible home stats, be them concrete or miscellaneous, still almost always have the refs on their side more than the visiting team. So now, why are fans the most important factor? Well, it's really as simple as you think it is.
I want to take control of the game. That's why I'm here.
They have the chance to motivate, verbally harass, distract, or bring down players of their choosing in all kinds of ways. And the atmosphere of a rowdy arena is a tough thing to ignore and an easy thing to embrace. But the players do have the option to not let it affect them positively or negatively. Just block out the noise, if you will. Well, the players aren't the only people on the ice who can affect the outcome of the game. The referees can too. A lot of the same pressures that come with playing the sport can be applied to the referees, and the referees are clearly influenced by home team atmospheres. When the game was slower, refs had more time to make judgment calls, more of a window to make reactionary calls, and every bad decision they make couldn't be immortalized by some pissed off fan on the internet, so refs made way more calls. Now, the game is faster than ever, has more debatable plays than ever, and players are getting better and better at selling calls or tricking you as a ref. And in general, it's harder to get calls right than ever. As a result, the referees absolve themselves from making decisions more than ever. They don't have as much time to be influenced by outside factors in their decision making.
Well, that's a high sticking penalty, but the officials haven't sent any stars to the box yet.
And again, the overall amount and the gap between home and away stats have continued to shrink even through 2 expansion teams. All the same can be said for the amount of penalties drawn, which is a very different stat than penalties taken or given, however you want to look at it. This graph features penalties drawn by home and away teams over the years. And like penalties taken, the amount of penalties drawn has significantly decreased for both home and away teams, but so has the disparity between them. The most telling example we have are the games played without fans in attendance. Whilst having many comforts and familiarities that their opponents did not, the gap between results closed dramatically, and the home numbers fell off a cliff just because there were no fans. As far as concrete rules that benefit the home team only, we can't really track the advantage last change gives or doesn't give, but a stat showcasing home ice advantage that we can track is face-off percentage. This graph features the league average of face-offs won by home and away teams over the years. Over the duration of a season, teams almost always have a better face-off percentage at home. The 2016-17 Avalanche had an absurd 60% win rate on face-offs at home, an NHL regular season record over this span. The Sabres, Blackhawks, Stars, Oilers, Predators, Flyers, Kraken, and Jets have never had a better face-off percentage on the road than at home over the course of a season in the salary cap era, and it's been very rare for other teams to do it, like once or twice over 2 decades rare. And when it has been done, it's often happened at interesting times. Like just about every other stat indicating home ice advantage, clearly lockout shortened seasons and seasons without fans affected even the most consistent home ice advantages. But also like everything else, the gap is closing. In the 2023-2024 season, for the first time in the salary cap era, in a normal season that wasn't cut short or played without fans and didn't follow a season that was, home teams on average won less than 2% more faceoffs than visiting teams. So aside from lockouts and seasons without fans, why is there less long-term faceoff advantage? Well, because most home teams find themselves in advantageous faceoff positions less and less, as they should theoretically have less offensive zone starts since they are given less power plays than they previously were at home, since they are more even in penalties taken or drawn with visiting teams than ever. The 2023-2024 season actually featured the second lowest average faceoff percentage from home teams and the second highest for road teams in the past 20 years. Another advantage awarded to home teams is the ability to select whether or not they want to shoot first or second in shootouts.
The lists are in. And the NHL's first ever shootout is about to begin.
Shootouts were added to the league along with the salary cap, meaning conveniently shootouts have been in the game for the entirety of these data sets, and we don't have to account for weird variables halfway, we can just look at the numbers. Now, are shootout results also a valid indication that home ice advantage is declining, or is it just not really a big deal who shoots first? Well, many teams who are given the choice do indeed elect to shoot first, in theory relieving your shooters of pressure and the need to be clutch. However, that potentially just gives the pressure to your goalie. So how about the results? This graph features shootout wins by home and visiting teams over the years. As we can see based on the stats, shootouts have actually rather heavily favored visiting teams. Home teams have only earned more points in shootouts than road teams 8 times in the 19 seasons they've been in place. To be fair, there's been a slight surge in home wins relatively recently, but for the most part the margins are thin. And still, 3 of the last 5 seasons have featured visiting teams earning more shootout points. Will they favor more home teams in the near future? Who knows. Shootouts are really close to a coin flip. One thing that's good is that we're getting less and less of them, and we can see how 3-on-3 overtime being added in the 2015-2016 season made a big difference in decreasing the overall amount. Nevertheless, the ability to choose who shoots first hasn't resulted in any consistent advantage. Again, if anything, not choosing has more often than not led to better results so far.
A chance to win it. Heatley scores.
Now this is where we get into the weeds, with another alarming aspect of home ice advantage, at least as far as public perception goes. First, the publicly available stats that aren't concrete, 100% factual stats are trash. Teams track whatever they feel is important privately, and certain teams clearly have a better grasp on this than others. Yet many fans, media members, award voters, and based on some very questionable moves, certain teams seemingly take nonsense statistics for granted. As we've been over, despite its decline, home ice means your team and you individually get extra calls. Extra calls means extra stats, and extra stats often means extra awards, value, or money. Is it coincidence, conspiracy, or common sense that some teams would like less educated teams in the public to have perhaps a more positive opinion on their players than they should? Over the years, there's been plenty of fans accusing teams of inflating or lowballing stats if they are all debatable or hard to define plays. Obviously, no one's faking goals and assists, but there are many other stats that are taken greatly into account by some.
But these people are basically being underpaid.
They're the ones that are at arbitration time. They're going to be coming for a big raise.
That could range from majorly inflated to majorly deflated, depending on what team someone played for. And this can be applied to all kinds of stats. Just say your guys were a little better than they were in just about every variable or expected way at home.
And they know that because of the stats.
If they're doing the
analytics.
stats. Yeah.
2 laughable prime examples are takeaways and hits. For one reason or another, hits are more commonly deflated numbers and takeaways are more commonly inflated numbers. But there are definitely a few oddballs out in each category. When left up to separate interpretation, especially when you have the potential of boosting a player's stats and maybe even perceived value, what defines a takeaway from any other turnover or a hit from incidental or minor contact can vary from person to person, franchise to franchise, home arena to home arena. The claim that the Islanders counted far more instances of incidental contact as a hit and therefore had more top hitters than others despite not seeming like a particularly physical team was a relatively common fan opinion a while ago. A specific article back in 2019 made these exact claims. Interesting for sure, but that theory doesn't pan out long-term whatsoever, as according to every other team's stats, the Islanders are actually the most physical team on the road out of everyone. And no one's bumping up road team stats to hype up the enemy and give opposing players more value in anyone's eyes, so it's safe to say the Islanders are a very physical team at home as well. But that article also claimed that the New Jersey Devils were being shortchanged on hits at home, perhaps having a higher standard for what constitutes a hit, so the author wasn't sold that they were as soft as they were credited for. And while they may not have been right about the Islanders, unless the Devils are truly scared to lay the body year in year out, but only at home, they were right about New Jersey's hits, based on their home and away records and where they stand amongst the rest of the league in various home and away miscellaneous stats. The Devils do indeed get shortchanged on hits and many other variable stats at home. A stat like giveaways is very vague and pretty much treated as the pointless stat it is, because by definition, every change of possession is a turnover or giveaway.
You guys, according to the stat sheet, had just one giveaway tonight. Is that something that you...
I don't follow the qualification of what a giveaway is.
Something that is somehow given much more credit is takeaways, a stat often mentioned when hyping up Selke voting.
Mitch Marner of the Toronto Maple Leafs, 104 takeaways.
No one was better this season at going to get the puck from someone else as Marner was, as he led the NHL in takeaways.
First of all, congratulations on the Selke nomination, and well-deserved, leading the league in takeaways.
In theory, a little more has to happen to gain a takeaway on the score sheet than a giveaway. But many organizations seem to have very different definitions of what constitutes a play worthy of tallying a takeaway for their team. In the 2005-2006 season, Montreal had 709 takeaways at home. Pittsburgh had 99, the highest and lowest numbers of home takeaways in a full season in the entire salary cap era. Yes, Montreal was a middle-of-the-pack team during the season, and Pittsburgh was a bottom-of-the-league team, but still, a difference of 610 takeaways? And if this doesn't raise skepticism, I don't know what will. Vegas has been credited with a lot of takeaways, both at home and on the road, every year they've been in the league. But, as a franchise, the Golden Knights have more credited home takeaways than the Los Angeles Kings do in the salary cap era. And the Kings have played 11 more seasons than the Golden Knights in that window. So it's safe to say, a takeaway is harder to tally in Los Angeles than anywhere in the league. And while there are many teams who are very solid in their stat tallying, almost always within the range of their league rankings and record on the road, like the Blue Jackets, Bruins, Ducks, Flyers, Lightning, Rangers, Red Wings, and Wild, there are many who seem to drastically inflate their ambiguous stats whenever they can, like the Hurricanes, Stars, and Sharks. Then there are those who significantly deflate their players' home miscellaneous stats, like the Devils, Sabres, Blues, and Jets. Whether any of this inflating or deflating is done deliberately or not is another story. But, more importantly, whether it's due to the fans or whatever aspect, there are teams who, without a doubt, get more favorable whistles at home. The Blues are the only NHL team who have been penalized more at home than on the road. The Bruins have been called exactly even, while the majority of the rest of the league has been penalized around 100 to 200 more times on the road than at home. But nobody has a differential of over 325. Until you see the Leafs, Canucks, and Flames. Those three teams all have a margin of over 480. So at one end of the spectrum, we've got the Blues, who have been penalized more at home than on the road. We've got the rest of the league in the middle, and then we've somehow got those three teams being penalized almost or over 500 times less at home than on the road. And those teams don't have home records that are outlandishly better than their road records or their league rankings, yet these stats insinuate that these teams were god level at home and or far below average on the road, outworking opponents to the tune of hundreds of penalties. Yet none of those teams have been god level at home or far below average on the road as far as team records go over that 2005 to 2024 span. So over the years, they have straight up just gotten way more favorable referees at home than on the road, almost regardless of how they play regular season to regular season. So finally, what happens when things matter most? When all of the hockey world's eyes are on you? In the playoffs.
Yeah, that's a big win. It's great to get home ice.
Now we know Winnipeg's got home ice. Are you feeling even better about their chances then?
Yeah, I like that the Winnipeg Jets would be at home.
And the Avalanche win in Winnipeg.
Everyone plays the entire season in hopes of making the playoffs and ideally having home ice advantage once they get there.
And they lock up home ice advantage in the first round of the playoffs.
In the playoffs, the margins for advantage have always been thin, and now, like the regular season, just about every gap is closing. Other than face-offs, that is, the gap in average percentage of face-off wins is staying pretty even in the playoffs. The 2023-2024 playoffs actually featured an average difference of over our significant 5% margin for only the fourth time in the salary cap era. But it's a bit of an anomaly. Many numbers from the 2023-24 playoffs were quite literally all-time great home face-off percentages in very small sample sizes, one of them being the best number put up in this entire study, as the Islanders won a ridiculous 64.7% of face-offs at home. Not only a salary cap record, but an NHL record, and it came over only 2 home games in a series that resulted in a gentleman's sweep for the Hurricanes over the Islanders, so yeah. Now, let's take a look at our other regular season graphs, but with playoff stats instead. This graph features home and away wins by playoff teams over the years. Here, the amount of wins earned on the road is usually not only very close to the amount earned at home, but actually surpasses it 5 times, including the last 2 seasons. So why is there seemingly less home ice advantage or influence in the playoffs?
This trend that we've seen so far in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Road teams winning as many games as they are. What do you guys attribute that to?
Just trying to steal one game if you're that road team, and it seems like teams have been able to do that, and that's why they're usually winning the series. But yeah, I don't know what the reason is.
Are the refs just calling a better, more accurate, or more fair game in the playoffs, resulting in less home bias? Nope. Everyone knows there are far less penalties called in the playoffs, to the point where you can often essentially get away with anything. You often have to force the refs to call a penalty, and even when it seems neither team could deny the call, they still won't make it a lot of the time. This graph features playoff penalties taken by home and away teams over the years. Again, less penalty calls, so the gap is closing. This graph features penalties drawn by home and away teams in the playoffs over the years, and again, less penalty calls of all kinds, so the gap is closing. This is partially why it's increasingly common to bar opposing fans from attending your playoff games via not accepting payment outside your region.
This policy is not unheard of, but it could give the Canes the extra boost they need for their home games.
But most of the time, the lack of calls in the playoffs outdo that wishful thinking. And again, penalties lead to the main source of home ice advantage across the board.
Holding the stake, you're up. Go on board.
The Tampa Bay Lightning are 3 points behind you now. Yeah. This is a real race for home ice advantage.
The Leafs come home for Game 6, but that's not necessarily a good thing. Toronto's lost 6 straight playoff games at Scotiabank Arena.
Again, you're right. Home ice advantage.
Between that and the fact that team mindsets can change for the better of the franchise on the road, at least if you take arguably the best coach in the league's word for it.
When you're on the road, it's just the team together. The guys are talking hockey. The guys are focused on plan instead of going home and all of a sudden it's not hockey anymore. It's having fun with your kids and dinner with the family. I like playing at home just for those reasons, but again, the hockey focus, you're probably more dialed in when you're on the road.
Maybe this is home ice disadvantage.
And truthfully, again, home ice doesn't mean one thing to me.
But finally, here's an intriguing perspective from John Tortorella.
I've never been a big home ice guy. It's great if you have it. To me, it's not a big deal until you get to a Game 7. I think that's where there is an advantage.
If you asked him to define the logic behind his answer, he'd probably tell you it was a stupid question and then storm off in a huff, while illiterate gargoyles overdosing on dopamine fill the comment section with classic. Can we get some real journalism? However, is he right? Well, he's 5-1 in Game 7s and 4-0 at home in those games, so for him, wanting home ice in Game 7 makes sense. Pete DeBoer is 8-0 in Game 7s and 7-0 at home in those games, so clearly they both do well in Game 7s, especially at home.
Can you possibly explain 8-0 in Game 7?
No, I can't. But I'll own it and I'll roll with it until it stops.
But don't worry, folks. Good old Pete DeBoer does have our answer.
My explanation is a lot of great players, a lot of good fortune, bad penalty calls that...
But again, some claim that last change puts too much pressure on the home team and makes them overthink the game.
This club has had a handful of Game 7 defeats in recent years. Does it leave you with a...
When you're the road team, you don't have to do the matching. I mean, you don't have to overcoach.
No doubt, yeah. Marty talked about it being checkers on the road at chess at home. He said checkers a lot more fun.
I don't know a single person who knows how to play both chess and checkers who would tell you that checkers is more fun, but checkers is definitely more simple. The road team can just go out and play. But of course, no one is forcing you to line match. You can do whatever you want. And again, John Cooper is as good as coaches get, and it doesn't really seem to matter as much for him.
They will, at some point tonight, because of you and your will, they will decide to lose.
As he's 2-0 at home in Game 7s, but also an even 2-2 on the road. So is home ice, specifically in Game 7, really a tangible benefit? Well, it depends on how you look at it, how well you use or I guess cope with your home ice pressure and advantages. Those coaches may just be better coaches than others in general. But there are coaches held in high regard who have had mostly negative results in Game 7s regardless of home ice. Jared Bednar is regarded as one of the league's best coaches. He's 0-3 in Game 7s, 0-2 at home. And of course there's Bruce Boudreau.
Besides, I've played in 8 Game 7s all at home, and I've lost 7 of them. So, I mean, there's a reason I'm standing behind this desk right now.
And it's far from impossible to win Game 7s on the road.
I retired as a player and fell into coaching accidentally because my roommate Paul Maurice needed an assistant.
Paul Maurice just won a Stanley Cup in his only Game 7 at home. He's 5-0 in Game 7s, meaning he's 4-0 on the road. So clearly home ice isn't the end-all be-all of Game 7s. This chart represents Game 7 wins at home and on the road. In total, the amount of Game 7s won in the salary cap era is very even. 43 home wins and 39 road wins. However, those numbers have been evened out by 2 specific years. And home teams have indeed won more Game 7s in 12 out of the past 19 seasons. So it does seem that home ice can be beneficial for coaches on average, at least for those who can handle it in Game 7s. And even though the gap is small, the advantage minimized, and that there are coaches who consistently overcome the potential deficit of being the road team, despite that President's Trophy winning teams have only won 2 cups in the salary cap era, despite that 11 out of 19 cups have been won on the road in the salary cap era, and despite that all these stats tell a story of diminishing returns as far as home ice advantage goes, I would still assume that more often than not, given the choice, most teams would, for now, still choose home ice, because not everyone is Paul Maurice. For some, the sights, sounds, smells, and feelings of home ice advantage are still worth playing for, while others seem to appreciate the ability to adapt to situations and turn disadvantages into advantages.
Oops, I slipped.